Kevin stole my agenda.
Good evening, and welcome to the October 4th, 2017 meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. Since there's only one person in the audience here, and she already knows the rules, I'll dispense with them tonight.
Maria, you get audience member of the night award.
You have to remind us to turn our phones off.
All right, so the first order of business is the minutes from the last meeting, from the last meeting, September 27th.
I thought we,
Yes, Peter?
Page 7, correct my spelling of my name.
I think that's in order.
You just catch the important stuff.
page 7,
Peter.
Peter or Walsh?
Without the E on Walsh.
Walshy?
Yeah.
Oh, we have a nickname.
Page 7.
There we go.
All
New
right.
nickname.
Most people would be okay with it. Mr. Walsh.
Anything else? Motion?
I move we accept as discussed.
Second.
Or as drafted.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? So moved. All right. Moving to request for determination of applicability. RBK Real Estate LLC, 372 Maravista Avenue, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to build 2 additions, make interior renovations, a second-story addition, and install a paved driveway and dry wells. Jen? Okay.
We are recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Unanimous? So moved. Marion Flerkey, 528 Minot Road, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to Vista Group.
Yes, Madam Chairman. We are recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
It's fine.
Unanimous, so
Since
moved.
2004?
No.
Oh.
She has continuously requested her Vista prune. It's just an ongoing maintenance of the Vista pruning. So her
Okay.
permit lapses every 3 years, and she just renews it.
Okay, thank you. John Merlicina, 15 Beach Street, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to Vista Prune.
Yes, Madam Chairman, we are recommending a -2 in the state and the bylaw with resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved.
You missed John Cribbins.
Second.
What did I do?
Hey,
We missed John
Can
Cribbins.
we
Well,
move?
on the agenda, they're in
Oh.
different order, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's all right. I'm sorry, I lost track. Did we have a motion and a second?
We do.
Okay.
I second.
You have, okay, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, unanimous, so moved. John Cribben, 61 Nashawena Street, West Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to install a drip dispersal system connected to the existing Title V sewage disposal system as part of a demonstration project.
Yes, we are recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
Second.
Please explain.
Madam
Yeah,
Chair?
could you tell us about the demonstration project?
I have a question.
Oh,
I'm recusing.
okay.
So what
I had
is
my hand
drip
raised.
dispersal? Is that something that you wipe your nose and?
I do not know.
It's basically, it looks like a drip
Sort of
tubing
more accessible.
system that is attached to the septic. I hate to say this, but Maury knows more about these than I do, and Mark's the one that reviewed this project, from what I
I don't
understand.
work for the people, but I was asked a question on it, so do I have to recuse?
You can, I think you can speak
Okay.
without.
Just,
Yeah.
just give an explanation of what the
Okay,
drip
what it
system
is,
is.
it's a force, it has a force main in it, so it's pressurized. And it's just like irrigation in a lawn,
Yeah.
just little teeny emitters like you'd have on your hydrangea beds. And it emits the effluent that's been treated. And it goes and it just drips below the surface 6 to 8 inches. and then it evaporates, either the grass takes it up and it evaporates, and that's the end of it. And
So,
it can be on it can be on hills, it can be in arboretums, it can be in B zones.
Thank
So
you,
this
Mark.
is
You
in
explained it a little-
lieu of a leaching field?
They have an existing leaching field, and what they're gonna do is they're gonna treat the effluent for nitrogen removal, and then put it through this system to use the water, from the black water in the drip system.
Gray water.
No, gray,
Black?
it'll be black water, it'll be treated.
treated
It's all
black water.
treated
Black
in
water.
a, pre-treated, and then force mained out through.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, so I believe we have a motion and a second? Yes, Susan?
Yes.
All right, did you have another question, Courtney?
No, that was.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. All right, next order, item of business, vote
Sounds like a
order
good idea.
of conditions for 117 Surf Drive.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the quorum for this project is
So she can read
Mark.
my writing.
Steve, Jamie, Courtney, Peter, and Kevin. Betsy and Mary were not at the
I was
September.
not here last
And I wasn't here,
Oh, okay,
and I was not, for Dell and me, I'm not here.
yep. Okay, gentlemen,
Want to run this?
basically,
Um,
117 Surf Drive, raise and rebuild of an existing house in a V zone. I believe the only issue after the abutter had their concerns with, at least from a staff point of view, was the use of the breakaway panels.
right.
They did reduce the size, or they did reduce the use of the breakaway panels. I think they said they reduced it by, or I think the existing footprint is over 2,000. They've reduced it, they're claiming by 52%, but still there is the enclosure of the 2 garages plus the entranceway and where the elevator is going to be.
Yeah. And normally we really only want the entry, the utilities, the elevator.
Well, there have been some cases that they did cite. Some of those cases, yes, they are considered breakaway panels, but not in what their proposal is. So the one on, there have been a couple that this board has approved that are more a slat-related one. I think one of the
Walker Street.
cases they cited was Moses Road, and that was a slat system one. Walker Street, if you go down Walker Street, was right over there. That's the very modern-looking house at the end that has a very open, kind of slat-looking breakaway panel. Some of the cases, there's one cited on Surf Drive that we have to check from a building standpoint because the architectural looks a lot different than the architectural this board approved, looks a lot different than what's out there. So we need to look at that. And there have been cases that this board has denied the use of breakaway panels. One of them was on Nashawina Street. The difference was that that was a new construction, not existing, going into a raise and rebuild, but it was a new structure out there. The board has allowed them in certain cases, not allowed them in other cases, and it allowed them in a complete reduced capacity in others, as you just did on 41 Nashawina.
Well, the one on Nashawina, we limited to,
The entranceway
The
and the
entranceway.
elevator,
so,
correct. The one out on 45 Little Neck Bars Road that was just approved was the entranceway and the elevator. Yep, the stairway, the entranceway, the stairway up, and the elevator.
which really has been pretty typical of late.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If you're going with the state building code, the elevator area, I don't think can be breakaway panels. That's.
No, no,
No,
no,
no, no.
those aren't,
That-
those are enclosed, and that's always been the case in your decisions, is the
Right.
elevator
So
area
I just wanna
has to be
Yeah,
enclosed, it cannot be breakaway panels, and then you have allowed the entrance.
yeah. And I mean, to me, that could also, that space could also be used as a chase for utilities and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of the, they did cite some cases,
Please try some.
so.
Steve?
I'll make a motion to accept this order as discussed, including the fact that we're denying that breakaway panels, they may enclose the stairway and
Yes.
stairwell.
Well, we're limiting it to that.
I mean, the stairwell and the elevator.
Is that clear enough, Jen?
So you want to limit the breakaway?
Well, there's not
I
breakaway.
thought you said that
That's solid.
they can't
couldn't
be
be.
breakaways
Don't-
around the
They can't be.
elevator.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
No, they can't be, so I'm
They're
just
not
saying,
breakaway.
Right here would be.
in
okay.
effect, we're denying the breakaway panels altogether, because the only place they can
Oh, okay.
enclose is the stairway
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and the.
Let me pull the
elevator shaft.
architecturals for a
So those
second,
wouldn't be
guys.
considered-
Can't be breakaway.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's my motion.
Okay, well, here's the issue, the way the house is designed. If you all have it, okay, I guess that's, is that the front of the house? I guess that's the front.
Yeah,
Okay, so open it all, okay.
Pretty much completely.
So in other words, there's no.
So if you're looking, if everybody can look at their architecturals, and
Where's-
just so,
okay.
so here's the elevator.
Yeah,
This would be the
the-
front door entrance. This would be enclosed, all of this.
That would be enclosed in breakaways.
No, not in breakaways, because this is the elevator unit,
Yeah.
right here.
The elevator unit is inside of that and can be put in, that has to be solid,
That has to be solid, yeah.
right.
And then
But-
this'll be,
but
I believe.
the rest of the, around the stairway can be breakaway.
Just let them out.
Right.
I believe so, yes.
I mean,
Jamie, can the stairway be breakaway, or does that have to be solid too?
No, that can be breakaway.
Okay,
It's really just the elevator.
okay.
So
But
then what we need to do is to ask them to submit a revised plan. We should mark this up to exactly what it is we're saying can be enclosed and be breakaway panels. So, and then they should submit revised architecturals that reflect that.
Yeah.
You want to look it up, Jamie?
No, I got it. So
Attached
it's,
to the-
the elevator
that
has to
stairway.
be solid,
You
the
have that.
staircase has to be breakaway.
There's no revision.
and the rest of it's not there.
See, right now, the walls, the exterior of the building, where the garage is, it's all open inside, and there's walls there. So what we would be saying is that where the front entrance is, where that entryway is, the line going down on either side of the stairwell, would it be extended out to that point where the doors are?
It would have to be.
And that becomes the area that can be enclosed.
the entryway.
Yeah, that's fine.
But we should mark that up and then give it to them and tell them to submit it as a revised drawing.
So we have a motion, do we have a second?
I would even be okay with
Just go straight down.
going out there and
Yes,
coming
yeah,
over.
Yeah, exactly.
because- And then that way they don't have to
So they have an
redesign.
entryway, yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
just
fair.
enclose the entryway and elevator and staircase, and they can give me a revised plan. And then that way, it'll even give them a little bit more enclosed over there.
So you're gonna take all the walls off of what looks like garages? Mm-hmm. And remove the garage doors,
I guess, yes,
right?
correct. And just enclose, that's what they're saying.
And
So we're-
other than that,
Basically, they're gonna let them out now.
right. And
As
other
an
than that,
entryway.
the lower level is completely exposed?
Yes.
Except for piers?
Correct.
Okay. I'm with that.
I'm not totally up to speed on the subject. And we haven't had the discussion that we will have today or next week or whatever. So, and I'm not comfortable with voting the restriction because we have done it both ways in the past, and that's my opinion.
No, that's fine. Unfortunately, Peter, the board needs to vote this within either this week or next. We had a meeting last week, so either this week or next week.
Okay.
So there isn't really time to flush out the entire discussion.
Okay.
Tonight, we just had an open hearing, really. All you had was RDAs, and Jamie had requested that the topics be placed on the agenda, which was why they're on today. I fully anticipate this discussion to last a few months or a few different hearings for you guys to get comfortable and
Yes, so
everybody to.
it's not fair to say we could clear it
So
up for
I
next
can't
week.
push him off, and if within a couple of months this board does make a concrete decision on the use of breakaway panels, the applicants can always come back for an amended order.
Yeah, I think.
But I understand it is
Easy for me to
hard.
speak about spending his money, but the modifications to change what we're approving to what he has here are relatively modest.
Yeah.
So
Probably save money.
he could come
actually
back
saved
with an amendment, and if it was approved, basically all he'd be out is whatever they put in for surrounding the stairwell, basically.
Well, and in theory, they would ask for that amendment before they've
It's
actually
already
started
got-
that
It's already
piece of
got
it.
it on his plan, so.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually, shouldn't.
I mean, it's something that the board has grappled with for a long time, which is why we're gonna have the discussion and make it very clear. And I know there are some engineers and representatives out there that do want to have a discussion with the board, and I fully would anticipate this board to engage the people that you regularly see for a discussion. We're not going to make any decisions tonight. I wouldn't allow the board to make any concrete decisions tonight on any of these topics without fully engaging the, additional stakeholders in this discussion.
Mr. Byrd?
We have, it seems to me we have a couple of options besides approving or not approving what's we're talked about. That is, we can table this until after we've had our discussion about breakaway panels.
You can't, Courtney.
No.
You can't.
You have to take
You're
a
not
vote
going to
now,
have,
Courtney.
Courtney, I just said it, you're not going to make a concrete decision on the subject tonight. So basically,
We
you
were
need to
gonna.
vote the way you've always been voting. Okay, it's not fair to the applicant. We can't put off
Okay,
their
all right.
decision. This isn't going to be solved tonight, it's not going to be solved next week.
But this is a good compromise, though, that
Yep.
if we vote what we see right now, as we see it, and then he can come back, no matter how far we've gone along with it.
I mean,
I
as a
mean, you can always
builder,
ask.
Jamie, how difficult would it to be to construct breakaway panels on something like this after it's already been constructed? Because I
Well,
usually see them put them on at the
It's
end.
not an issue at all,
Yeah,
because, I
okay.
mean, if it were me, I would just, before I made that, if you told me I could only do that center section,
Yep.
before I was ready to do that, that's when I would apply for an amendment. Then I haven't gone anywhere, I'm not going backwards.
Okay,
And you're gonna build the stairs anyway. They're probably gonna be very early in the project because they need to get
up.
access. So I don't believe we're putting anything unrealistic in front of
Okay.
them.
Okay.
You know, if they choose to do what we conditioned and then ask for an amendment, so be it. But they're really not going that far backwards even at that point.
Okay.
So,
It's just like watching these construction projects, it seems like those types of construction,
with
that's
panels.
always almost at the end, right before all the, like, okay.
yeah.
Okay,
So, you know,
I'm just making sure that there's an
I don't think we're
option
giving
and we're
them a
not
hardship in any
hamstringing
way.
after your discussion. Okay, that's fine.
Plus they put windows in.
Okay, so limit the breakaway panels to the entranceway surrounding the staircase and the elevator. Submit a revised plan to be approved.
I would think it could be,
Yeah, I'll
Staff.
approve it
By staff.
by staff.
as shown in your drawings,
Yep,
basically.
and we'll go from there. Okay?
Courtney, you
And
made
I
a
don't think
motion,
there were
right?
any other issues, really, there was something about the electrical,
Pole.
but,
No, that was
No,
just
it's
the
the
neighbor's
pole.
concern that they would disrupt power and.
yeah, okay.
I
And that is not really, that's gonna be up to the,
I mean, anything
the
can happen, we all
utility.
know that, but that
Yeah,
they're
you
not
know,
gonna
you-
deliberately.
I don't think any utility is really, you
And
know,
the other issue was the
Disrupted it,
apparent pesticide or herbicides.
herbicides on the lawns
Right,
and,
but we all visited the site, it didn't appear the
fine.
herbicides were currently working.
yeah. I just got that, oh, slow. Okay,
Do we have a second?
There's a second
Second?
down there somewhere.
I'm sorry.
Peter?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
We took this long.
Not
on
unanimous.
every-
Thank you.
On
Please.
everyone.
Yeah,
I vote no.
right, I was about to ask, is our 5 minutes?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
No,
Oh, Mr. Chair.
One no.
hang on.
What?
my mistake, it wasn't unanimous. Mark voted
Oh,
no.
I'm sorry. I was
Sorry.
going to ask whether
Sorry
our
about that,
5-minute
Mark.
rule of thumb for RDAs
Without comment.
included
Without
our
comment,
Not
deliberation
comment.
of the
I like breakaway
RDAs.
panels. I think
It
they're
wasn't
appropriate.
an RDA. This was a-
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, there wasn't, last.
I just came back from New Jersey where I spent last
Yes,
weekend.
it did.
Where Sandy hit. I
All
saw
right,
lots of
let's
them.
Moving on.
get back to business here. So now we are moving into our other business of the evening. We're going to discuss, we have discussion scheduled on 3 topics, starting with location and use of denitrifying septic systems.
Madam Chairman, can I just start off by saying just a few things? One, all the topics on your agenda tonight, or at least 2 of them, have been heavily debated by this board on and off for the past many years, including the spacing of plans. So I think it's you know, it's a good time to start addressing these issues. Again, you had a fairly, very light agenda tonight. We'd be out of here by now, so I think it was a good night to put those on since Commissioner Matthews expressed an interest of actually placing it on the agenda. I don't think, as I just said, you guys are going to solve anything tonight, I think, but it's good to open the discussion. Again, it was on our agenda. I do see some people in the audience, and it's great to see, to get some input, but I do think we're going to be scheduling additional public meetings to get the input from other stakeholders, consultants, attorneys that you work with, and everything else. And it might be a longer process, but I think it's one that we have to go through.
But at least-
Betsy?
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to make a suggestion that this will be a preliminary talk, but then we have an invitation
Yes.
to all of our regular,
I have, I
All
mean,
the
it was on
regulars.
the agenda, they all know, and I did talk to I talk to the engineers all the time. I did let them know it was on our
Right, but you
agenda,
typically
but
invite
that,
them for
you
input.
know, it was just a preliminary discussion, and that we really didn't want to bog down the night with it, and we don't want to be here till midnight debating this, but that we will be opening up a public hearing and specifically asking them to come in and
Right.
present and things like that. Okay? So what was our first topic?
It's the denitrifying septic systems, and I would just add to what Jen was saying on this topic, that we don't have anything, and our regulations are silent on this, and maybe that's how it'll remain, and maybe it's a matter for another body to regulate, like the Board of Health. But we have, from time to time, depending on the location usually of a project, debated whether or not to require a denitrifying system. And recently we did write an order of conditions requiring that for a property on West Falmouth Harbor. Because it was on West Falmouth Harbor, you know, it's one of those situations where we are taking cumulative effects into account, because there are quite a number of homeowners who have opted to put denitrifying systems in that area, and to have new projects going in that do otherwise seems counterproductive. So anyway,
Just a clarification, there's been two
Two?
that you've denied. There was one on
Swift,
Swift,
Burgess.
thank you, I was gonna
Burgess.
say
It was,
was Burgess.
Rice
Rice.
Street.
Yeah.
Rice Street, yeah. Yep, it was 8 Rice Street, and then this one, and both have opted to install denitrifying septic systems. Well,
you mean,
have chosen not to appeal
They're not
your
appealing
decision
our
and
decision. That's
are
good.
installing the denitrifying septic system without an appeal of the order of conditions. I think the water quality issue is under this board's purview. I think it is something that if this board felt strongly could craft with assistance from other bodies, Board of Health, Water Quality Committee, could craft and place into your regulations. I think it's an issue that this town is spending an enormous amount of money on, and needs to be addressed by all boards and all regulatory bodies.
yes, I didn't mean to imply really that we didn't
No, I know.
have jurisdiction.
No, I
But I guess what I had in mind more than anything else was the fact that West Tisbury, I think the Board of Health has just decided that they're going to be requiring denitrifying systems under, certain circumstances, and I imagine on a case-by-case basis, but they are going to kind of formalize that in their regulations.
Oh, good, I'll look up that.
So,
Or, that was Board of Health?
Yes,
Okay.
I think it was in the Vineyard Gazette recently.
Okay.
And, Mark, I'm sorry.
I would comment, I see we have the water quality people here. I was
Yes.
on the sewer commission for Mashpee for a number of years, and I'm sure as the same was done here, a great deal of modeling has been done to figure out what you should do. And the answer in my mind is not to do it one system at a time. They probably have to redo, I don't know anything about the numbers, but I can imagine they have to cut the amount of nitrogen going into West Falmouth by a half or more. And if that's what you have to do, replacing them all with IA systems isn't going to cut it, much less replacing one or two. But more to the point is, it's got to be done, I believe, out of water quality, not out of us trying to do a piecemeal. That just doesn't make any sense. The same with Board of Health. They can deal with health issues, but the nitrogen problem is one that's a global problem. It's got to be dealt with globally, that's all. Just not appropriate to do a piecemeal, I don't think.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment, the town of Wareham is actually requiring everybody to do nitrify. And they've given them so many years to do it, but the Buzzards Bay Coalition has worked with the town, and they are actually forcing them into doing it. The reason the West Falmouth area was targeted is because of the town wastewater plant is what degraded West Falmouth Harbor. And again, the Buzzards Bay Coalition put the thumb screws to the town. They had, in the DEP, made them repair the system up there so that it wasn't continuing to throw nitrogen into West Falmouth Harbor. The pilot programs that are out there are primarily just people trying to help a little more. And they are targeted, Mark, mostly, they're all on the waterfront. And the numbers the Buzzards Bay Coalition put out are pretty interesting, that it is working. I live there. I watch water quality. I don't test the water, but I can tell by the sea lettuce and the algae, things that have improved, just in front of houses that have done this, that have gone from cesspools in groundwater, going in and out with the tide, to denitrifying systems. So there is a benefit, and you say it has to be, everybody, but inch by inch, row by row, eventually you get there. And, you gotta start somewhere. You just can't say, oh, let's go do Mara Vista, let's sewer the town. It took 30 years to sewer Mara Vista. When we put the sewer treatment plant, we had all these dreams of all these areas, West Falmouth, and, everybody was gonna get sewered. It doesn't happen that way, so it's not that fast. So I think that we are responsible for water pollution control, which nitrogen is water pollution as far as eelgrass is concerned, and fish and shellfish, and we're there to protect them. So I hope that, I think the problem is it's not clear, and it needs to be stated in our regulations clearly if we are going to go down this route, and say, within X amount of feet.
Well, how many? Pick a number.
Well, you can't. That's what
Well,
we
where
will.
and pick 100.
Well,
You
that's-
cannot have a septic system within 100 feet of a waterway.
That's not
Period.
possible.
Yeah.
That's
Or
not
you
possible.
can't- or-
That's the reg.
Not have a septic system or not have a D-night system.
No, nothing.
That's impossible. You have homes, you have multiple homes within
For
100
new
feet.
construction,
Have a solid tank.
you have to be able to get it outside of that 100-foot range.
I don't think, realistically, Steve, I don't think that's gonna work.
I didn't think so either.
Yeah, so what I.
That's why I was asking.
Yeah, what I think is when we start looking, if the board chooses to regulate D-night somehow, then we're going to, and I'd love to hear from Water Quality and Board of Health tonight, then we'll start looking at, your jurisdiction is 100 feet from your closest resource area. That's what you can,
Right.
that's what you can govern in. That's what you have jurisdiction over. If you want to go down this road, and if this is a decision this board makes, then we'll determine what, if everybody within 100 feet of a water body, not within 100 feet of a coastal bank or a dune or
Right.
anything like that, but within 100 feet of a water body, maybe that's the way you go. I don't know, but we will do it. But by saying you can't have a septic system within 100 feet, it's just because you have a lot of upgrades. All you see is upgrades. So that's what we have to go with it. There's cesspools out there, there are failing Title Vs, we have to be able to upgrade them. So. Maury, question. Wareham, is it under Board of Health or Concom, or was it a separate bylaw, or do you know?
I think it was through the selectmen.
So it's bylaw?
I'm not positive.
Okay.
I'm not positive.
Selectmen.
Corin Patterson would know, CM might know.
Okay.
But
We'll look at it. We can poke around. And that's information like the staff will gather for you to help you make a determination and look at all this. Okay.
Courtney?
Clearly, it's within our jurisdiction to, within our jurisdiction to establish guidelines, require D-night systems on new construction, denitrification systems on upgrades. That's what we can do. We can't go beyond that. The issue is, does the nitrogen that actually goes through our water table understand our jurisdictional limits? And
No.
No.
I suspect it doesn't, and I know it doesn't. So, ultimately, it's the town, whether it's health department or water quality or board of selectmen or town meeting or whatever, has to make a decision about it. And even then, you go beyond, it's a regional issue. We're talking about Cape Cod, and so does the line stop at the Falmouth-Mashpee boundary? So it is not an easy thing. We can certainly make a statement. We can adopt a regulation that says any new septic systems or any upgrades have to be denitrifying systems. We can do that within our jurisdiction.
You
Well, that's a
can
place
do-
to start.
Yeah, it's a place to start, or, after we go down this discussion and have this discussion more thoroughly and get more information, you might end up just making a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. You may have a partner body out there within the town that may say, hey, listen, these two bodies have gotten together, this is the science out there, and this is what we're strongly recommending to the Board of Selectmen to change the bylaw, to make it a bylaw in town. There's a lot of options out there for this board to take, but you have to have the discussion.
The planning board already has requirements for denitrifying systems in developments. With density,
In development.
in East Falmouth, in Hatchville, in the woods, places that you'd go, my goodness, why are they denitrifying there? Because they have the science, they know where the nitrogen goes, it moves 1 foot a day. So if you're in a water overlay district or in a coastal pond overlay, you might think you live in the woods up on Blacksmith Shop Road, but your effluent is going to a water body, creating pollution, basically. Nitrogen is pollution to the harbors and the embayments, which is why Mara Vista is all done now. So, there are already boards that are requiring it.
Is that under their subdivision?
That could be
Subdivision
understood.
regulations?
Yeah, and actually zoning has it now, I think, for those, the ancillary apartments. That if you wanted to have a second apartment, remember that was on town meeting last year? You could, on one lot, you could have a mother-in-law apartment, but you had to denitrify your septic system when you did that.
There's some
They have
discussion, yeah, there's some
zoning.
discussion about
Yeah.
that, on what exactly the accessory bylaw is requiring, and there, I think, is some internal discussion or
I just saw it on town meeting.
conflicting regulations out there. We're working through that. It has, the Board of Health is involved with that. But, do you want to hear from water quality?
Yes, I'd be happy to hear from
But
anybody
they're
who
so
would like.
far, they're so far back, we can barely see them.
Well, if we had our Orbitron up there, we could all.
Can you see the video panels from back there?
We didn't want to disrupt you.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I think it's, I mean, we can kind of have more of an informal discussion right now, but I
Yes,
mean, I think.
although we do need to ask you to still use the podium
Yeah.
for the benefit of the
Should we
people
bring the
watching on
microphone up?
TV.
Take the mic over and
Could we bring the
Okay.
microphone over to
Microphone.
there? I think that would work.
They just need.
Yeah, if you want
it.
to, if you can,
Take the microphone as well.
take the microphone to your seat, that's acceptable.
Yeah.
First
Great.
of all, thank you for coming.
Yes,
It's a
thank
discussion
you.
that, we'd like, obviously, it's going to involve multiple bodies and committees within the town.
Well, we want to thank you for putting this on the agenda for discussion, and we realize that this is sort of the beginning of a conversation, and it has a number of dimensions. I'm Virginia Valiela. I'm the Vice Chair of the Water Quality Committee. With me is Sia Karplus, who is our technical consultant and has been particularly active with the Buzzards Bay Coalition in installing the IAs in the West Falmouth area, and also very knowledgeable in a technical sense. And John Waterbury, who is a member of the Water Quality Committee, and also a member of the Board of Health, which also has a great concern about water quality and clearly has jurisdiction over some septic system repairs and installments. We're not here as an official position. This is just a conversation, and we'd like to share information with you. We'd like to encourage you to continue this conversation, and each of us may have somewhat different viewpoints on where we think you should go or what should come first. But this is a great start, and listening to all the comments that you've made so far, a lot of really good points have been already put on the table. I want to say from the town as a whole, we have 15 estuaries that are impaired to some degree. The sewering is very expensive. Collecting it, pumping it, treating it, and then where do you discharge it are all really large problems. And the Water Quality Committee is looking at the town as a whole, but we also recognize that there are a number of these 15 troubled estuaries that the problem can be addressed at the local level, within that particular watershed. Doesn't need sewering. And so that's where innovative alternative septic systems can play an important role. Secondly, we know from the work that's been done in the West Falmouth area as a demonstration project that the technology has improved. The state has a standard of 19 milligrams per liter. We've got systems that are all of which are producing 12 milligrams per liter. So that's something worth going after when you think that the original strength coming out of the septic system will be anything from 25 milligrams, 35 milligrams, 60 milligrams. So to get down to 12 is definitely has some bang for the buck. West Falmouth watershed is not planned for sewering, and so local prevention and local improvements are an important part of the planning. The work that's being done by the Buzzards Bay Coalition and the town as a lead in these IAs, we now are approaching 30 properties. And we are really thrilled that this board, this conservation that you're hearing on 61 Nashawina Street, I'm sorry, 41 Nashawina Street. It does say 61 here. That's a different one. Okay, sorry, 41. Where you basically said you really wanted them to consider an IA, and it did work out to do that. I think that's a real municipal triumph, personally, my feeling. And it sort of kicks off this conversation here. I would like to see a regulation developed through the Conservation Commission for properties that come before you. And I think the Board of Health will also have some comments about how they view it. I watched the 41 Nashawina Street hearing, and I was sort of amused to hear their engineer say, you know, this is not in your regs, but it could be, and which I thought was a very revealing statement. So clearly, he has some thoughts too, and this conversation needs to include engineers ultimately as well. You made a very good question about how far, what number, pick a number. The West Falmouth demonstration project has any property within 300 feet of the water body. And my husband, who has done a great deal of work on and research on nitrogen for decades, they did a literature research on sort of that question, and what he found was that if you can identify a plume coming out of the septic system, you basically do not have much degradation of the nitrogen before it reaches the water body. Clearly, at 300 feet, you could find a plume. He said the longest plume they were ever able to find was about 600 feet. So I give you those numbers as at least as a beginning bracket for where we might draw the line. That's to find a distinct plume from a particular property. Once you get beyond the 600 feet, basically the plumes merge, and you cannot identify a particular property. And if you ask anybody who's done groundwater sampling, you will find nitrogen in our groundwater at all different levels in all different places. And it's because there are so many individual sources that go back to what Maury was saying. Wherever you are in town, you are still putting nitrogen into the water, groundwater, and it will eventually, some of it, reach your estuary. If you're close to your estuary, then at a foot per day, it gets there really quickly. And that's why, because you have jurisdictional authority over resource areas within 100 feet of a resource area, you as a town body have an opportunity to help work with this water quality issue. I think that would sort of be my first general comments on the various things I heard, and C or John would.
I just want to amplify.
Okay.
I just want to amplify a couple of quick things that Virginia said. One is the 300 feet is also was developed by the Environmental Protection Agency for work they did in the Chesapeake. This question of attenuation. At what point does groundwater get attenuated and denitrification occur? And what they found is within 300 feet there is none. And that's why we picked it for the West Falmouth project at 300 feet.
Yeah, please, I'm sorry. Repeat that, what you just said?
The Environmental Protection, the EPA,
yeah,
as part of a septic review for the Chesapeake, identified that 300 feet as an area where no groundwater attenuation, so no denitrification within 300 feet of a water body. And so that is the critical area, that first 300 feet.
okay.
And so that's documented, and it's a report from 2012. I mean, it's a fairly significant report from the EPA for the Chesapeake, where they actually have standards for septic systems. And
Sia,
within-
can you send me that report?
I can.
Obviously, you have it.
Okay.
Can you
I-
send that?
And I can also
so
send you the Wareham regs, and I can send you the Tisbury regs too, because we've looked at them. So that was one thing I just wanted to amplify what you said about why 300 feet.
Could I ask a question? I'm looking at this
That's our map,
booklet,
that's 300 feet.
and I suppose that all the other houses are contributing to the nitrogen problem. However, some of the nitrogen doesn't go in here. Probably it goes underneath our estuary and goes out into the ocean.
That's not what we found.
Oh, could you explain that?
It's because groundwater travels more or less horizontally, except to the degree that rainwater, recharge we call it, comes in and layers on top. So when you are close to the coast, you're basically the effluent trickles down through the soil to the water table, and then just starts moving with the water table and surfaces it within the estuary. And it does that at average foot per day. So within a year, if you're within 300 feet, your nitrogen is already in the bay or the harbor. As you move farther inland, there is more time for recharge to occur. And so if you were to do a cross-section, like a layer cake, and take a particular source, and I'm going to take the wastewater treatment plant as a very big source. So that's far enough inland. I'm remembering it's 5,000 feet, but it's something like that. You will find that the groundwater flow line with that plume actually appears to be curved, and it is deep, and it does come out in the middle of the harbor. Anything close to the shoreline will come out more or less right at the shoreline. You look puzzled. What's...
Well, I'm trying to discern the flow patterns from the pollution in addition to going into the estuary. Some of them must go into the ocean.
Actually, I'm quoting from the U.S. Geological Survey. They did, when they originally studied the aquifer for the whole Cape, they did a lot of monitoring right at the shoreline, drill into the beach, and they found that the fresh water tended to surface right at the edge. It does not end up way out in Buzzards Bay.
And that's been revisited
Yes.
by a number of researchers, and the story continues to be, it comes out in the estuary.
Yeah.
They're talking about
Mulcoid is another.
That's another good example. Yes.
And we did a great flyover when all the estuaries froze. We flew over West Falmouth, and the shoreline of West Falmouth was not frozen.
Yeah.
And that's because groundwater was coming in right at the margins.
And it overrides the salt.
Yeah, and it overrides, and we still have that footage, and we sent it to USGS because we did a number of the estuaries. And they were thrilled with this information, because we just got the drone out when it was frozen, and you could see all the little freshwater inputs.
And how much does the nitrogen pollution go down with travel underneath the land? For instance, if someone were in the woods in the middle of Falmouth, how much nitrogen would be reduced just by traveling to the
The
estuary?
attenuation question.
That's a different question.
That's a great question, and the answer is, we have not studied it. And it really depends on, is there a carbon source? Because the only thing that's going to attenuate a nitrate, for example, is denitrification. The only way you're going to get denitrification is if the microbes have food. And one of the issues in sandy soil is a lack of carbon. So Massachusetts Estuaries Project was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar study of all of the impaired waters in southeastern Massachusetts, including Falmouth's 15 estuaries. And they did a lot of analytical work and did not find, did not believe, did not scientifically analyze, did not find denitrification. And so their assumption is that the upper watersheds, north of 28, let's say, on the south coast, do not attenuate because there is no carbon source. And that is the way they did their analysis. They did find that underneath a septic system, there was a little bit of attenuation. And so they have all their calculations, but they spent a long time studying this, and their bottom line assessment is there is no attenuation. Now, EPA found moderate attenuation, you know, up to about 1,000 feet away. So the 300 feet is, I think, a very scientifically consistent distance for no attenuation.
Oh, yes, but it also doesn't say anything about what happens, those properties that are farther in, farther away from the water, maybe it's a question of time, not contribution. So
Right.
maybe this year, there won't be an issue, but 2 years from now, they're still going to be contributing.
And so the watersheds are broken into less than 10 years of travel time and more than 10 years of travel time. And all of that you're looking at in that picture is within the 10 years of travel time.
Oh, certainly, at least.
Right. And so the other thing I wanted to just amplify is your comment about piecemeal. And one of the things that we see is a lot of development and a lot of changes happening one property at a time. And as we're doing large-scale planning, we see, especially around the water, things happening one property at a time. And so the actual value of capturing and being able to impact those properties one at a time, we think is pretty significant.
Everything we do
But the
is
thing is-
property by property.
Exactly.
That's all we get, that's
Thank you.
Right.
our cut.
John, did you want
That's your
to?
copy.
Yeah, and so it's always done.
So,
Yes.
So let's use it.
Could I come back to the point where, of my, I just wanted to quote, in 2013, the Board of Health in Wareham updated regulations. Within 150 feet of a waterway, no new septic systems are allowed to be installed. I'm just quoting the regulation. And within 500 feet, they have to be denied.
I'm not sure they
So there has to-
implemented that.
Is that
There has
us
to
or is
be
that
an
Wareham?
exception for,
That sounds like Wareham.
They had to
It's
do,
Wareham.
they
Oh, it
had to
is.
have,
It's Wareham.
Oh, I
they
thought it was
had to
Wareham,
have an
yeah.
exception for an upgrade. They had to have.
yeah.
In two-
There's no way they couldn't have had an
No
exception
new
for-
septic systems.
No new septic.
Right.
So that came out of the Board of Selectmen. So
Board of
that
Health.
was Board of Health, I'm sorry.
I can't tell you that it was, this is Buzzards Bay Coalition stuff.
Yeah.
So I
And-
can't tell you it was implemented, but that, I'm quoting, just so I'm
Yeah.
not crazy.
can I make one comment before you make? a
I'm
comment?
sorry to interrupt you guys.
No, it's okay, Steve.
So, but just to keep in mind, we have buffers to resources, but we also have jurisdiction in land subject to coastal storm flowage.
Yes, yes, you
So
do. You
everything-
regulate a septic system within there, too.
So
Yeah,
everything
so-
within the velocity?
Anything within the
Anything
flood
within
zone.
the flood zone.
Anything
The
within the
V
flood-
zone
yes.
and the A zone.
300 feet's no biggie for you guys.
No.
Right, so that's, I just want to point that out, well, during this discussion.
That is a good point.
So, if we decide to do something in this direction, we are going to have to say how many feet. But we, unfortunately for people,
But
it goes
you
way
also-
in.
Or
You
zone.
have a regulation that uses an existing map. Storm flowage.
We
zone,
use the
We use the
FEMA map.
FEMA map.
FEMA map,
Yeah.
so that's a possible tool.
So it's not
Correct.
Something
arbitrary.
that's already mapped and you're either in or you're out.
Absolutely.
Right,
Sorry,
and-
I'm
and
sorry,
those,
John.
I mean, we always determine where those resource areas are. It's a fundamental part of the review process.
Thank you.
That's great.
So, John Waterbury, I've been on the Board of Health since 1990, and we've been
On
dealing...
and off.
On and off, yes. I have to rotate off occasionally. We've been dealing with septic systems forever, and with IAs. And one cautionary note, the IAs which are now permitted by the state produce 50% reduction in nitrogen.
Right.
And at that level, they really don't do us a huge amount of good.
Exactly.
Until we get these new systems that we can get below 12 or 10, I think we would be poorly served to drop them in willy-nilly around town, because at 19, they just don't get us there. So that's one thing we should keep, and that's part of that West Falmouth project, is that we've been pushing the technologies and the people. And the reason that the vendors don't provide systems that meet 10 is nobody's pushed them. The state says 19, so they don't try to improve their systems. But there are systems now coming online which will do that. And as we think about upgrading how we deal with them, we certainly don't want to entertain putting systems of 19 very far. So that's one thing.
Okay.
And the other is, the Board of Health has always had the ability to regulate where we put this. I could go down to the Board of Health and by fiat, the 5 of us could say, we're going to put in IAs at 10, and we could get away with that. I think that would be a very poor plan. I think we as a group of boards should think this through and take something to town meeting as a bylaw that we could present as from the Planning Board and from the Conservation Commission and from the Board of Health and from the Water Quality Committee. And that if it's an idea that's good enough that we would all support it, then we ought to be able to persuade town meeting to pass it as a bylaw.
From the Coastal Resilience Action Committee too, because this has to do with the help of the
But I think that's the
estuary.
way we should think about proceeding. I very much favor the idea of this 300-foot buffer. And thinking of the West Falmouth project is a really neat place to start, because we've identified that buffer. We've got a number of people who have bought into it and are very interested in it. The coalition is interested in helping with it. And there are 160 other homes in that 300-foot buffer that we could target. And I would suggest that that's probably a good place to start. And if we see with a bylaw that we restrict to that watershed for the moment, we can have a real impact by doing this, then we can think about moving and doing it elsewhere. But I think we should proceed relatively cautiously and insist that we use systems that perform to a very high standard.
To a higher level.
I'd like to make a comment on that. If I
Go
may.
right ahead.
I completely disagree, and the reason is this. If you did get those 160 homes, you'd probably see a measurable impact at your monitoring station, and everybody would go on like this, but it would never get any better. That would be it. You'd get a sort of step down, and then, because those 300 homes wouldn't be contributing, but everybody else would be. And then you'd have to go back as the water quality, you'd scratch your head and say, well, what can we do now? We've got to do more. Should we go another 300 feet? Or what? I like planning and modeling. That's the kind of thing I used to do. I think getting your modeling up to date so you know that what the 300 homes or 160 homes will do, and know if that'll get you where you're trying to get to, or get you sort of close enough that within your flexible management, you could sort of say, we did it. But I think you've got to have a pretty good over picture of what's going to happen before you start picking away at it. Or you'll end up like you're building a garage and you get the garage start built and your car doesn't fit in because you just didn't think the whole thing through.
We did, actually.
So-
We love counting kilograms of nitrogen that need to be removed. It's what we do for a living, really. So we've looked at West Falmouth, and we've looked at the Mass Estuaries reports that have the present load
Right.
and the threshold, target load, and then you do the math and you subtract them and you find your target removal
Right.
load.
Yeah.
And when we modeled what happens when the upgrade to the wastewater treatment facility comes online, so it was 25.5 kilograms in the original report. It's now down to 3. If you subtract it, you say, okay, with the plant upgrades that the town spent millions of dollars to do, we've removed this number, thousands of kilograms from going into the estuary, what do we have left?
That's West Falmouth?
The answer is, it's West Falmouth.
Okay.
Yeah, the wastewater treatment facility plume goes into the Mashapaquet and the Snug Harbor sub-watersheds of West Falmouth Harbor. So since the town has spent millions of dollars and upgraded the plant, and it's now operating at 3 and not 25 milligrams per liter, what's left? The answer is 166 kilograms. And that 166 kilograms represents a number of houses, and I want to say it's 45 or 50.
At 16 or 12 or 3?
At 10 milligrams per liter. And so we have that analysis.
Okay, that's good.
And so the idea is what we're doing in West Falmouth is removing the last piece that will get us to what we call TMDL compliance,
That's
which
great.
is
I didn't
the
understand that.
total. And we do this for
Okay.
every estuary. And we think about, and the Water Quality Committee has gone, starting on the West Coast and moving the South Coast, at a preliminary level and now at a more detailed level, counting those kilograms and saying, if we use IA systems and shellfish and permeable reactive barriers and inlet widening, what can we do to get that exact number and thereby restore our estuaries? So that's what we do.
And then the nitrogen deposition by the rain goes down by 20% and everything gets better without doing anything, right?
I
Covers
think this is
build-out.
a discussion that we can continue. I didn't want to spend all night with both these discussions. I personally, from a staff point of view, like John's approach, I think the boards do need to get together. There's certain latitude this board can take, there's certain, regulations the Board of Health could implement, but we need to do it in a comprehensive way, and you guys do need to talk to the other boards. You need to have joint meetings, you need to have joint workshops and to come up with the best solution. Do you put a standalone regulation within the Falmouth Wetlands regs? Does the Board of Health do it? Or do we present something to the Board of Selectmen and ask them to go before town meeting with it? I mean, and Virginia said, we got to look at each watershed individually. What is the town doing right now to remove nitrogen in these watersheds? What can be done, and how can these regulatory bodies assist in that goal? So we can talk kilograms of nitrogen for the next hour, but we have two other discussion points, so I'm going to move this along.
Spacing.
I do believe there is a joint meeting coming up. We can continue it, but I just want to say there is a joint meeting coming up, and if this board wanted me to request to put something, this topic on that agenda, I can always send that to the Board of Selectmen.
Which joint meeting are you referring to?
Your meeting, a joint meeting on the 14th
Okay,
with
yeah.
planning and zoning, and I
Right, I
believe
have
Board
yet
of
to
Health,
see
but
what
I
the
could be
agenda
wrong,
for
yeah.
that meeting is, but anyway.
I haven't either.
So she's suggesting that this might be an item
Right,
on that agenda.
right.
Possibly.
Possibly, I don't know how long
I don't know, I haven't
I'd like to see
seen
the
it.
agenda before I
And the Board
suggest
of Health
something.
needs to be,
Included in
Yes,
that, yeah.
absolutely.
Aren't you invited to that meeting, John? You're certainly welcome to come on Saturday morning.
I'm
It's
sorry,
a
John,
public
I
meeting.
thought the Board of Health was part of
I
that.
don't think so. It's
Oh,
planning,
okay.
zoning,
okay.
ZBA and us, I think,
Okay.
and coastal resiliency. Well, they have a space problem, so.
Yeah, this room.
Mark?
I just have one other comment for us, in that when I was on Mashpee's conservation, we tried to deal with nitrogen. And it was very difficult to get a quantitative way to back up the regulation with any impact on the resource areas. You have to prove an adverse effect. Well, how do you prove it if you're going to increase the nitrogen level by 0.001, blah, 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 blah? You get into numbers, and then you get into all sorts of haggling between various engineers about one thing or
That's
another.
what I,
It's
that's
very
why I
hard to-
said it could be done, it could be done within your regulations, or it could be done as a recommendation along with other bodies to town meeting, to the Board of Selectmen. There are a lot of different ways this board can address the use of denitrifying septic systems.
Betsy?
John, are you chairman?
No,
Who's chairman?
Diane Mullen.
Well, I would like to suggest that Mary and Jen get together with the chairman of Health and your group and any other groups that we feel are appropriate, and set a time that we could have a joint meeting of the boards that would be involved to bringing this to the Board of Selectmen. You know, within the next couple of months. I mean, let's have a meeting. If that's what we need to do, is to get all these people in the room together, let's do it.
Okay.
A long meeting.
It'd only be one topic, right?
Yes, right.
One topic.
Okay.
Okay.
And
Terrific. So we'll be in touch.
presumably, Mary, and with guidance from our board and your board, will put together an agenda so it's a very well-organized, something will come out of that meeting.
And Sia or John, if you have any information you think might be helpful to this board to look at, please send along. I would appreciate it.
Yes. Happy to do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
very
for
much for your input.
You're always welcome here.
Yes.
And you can sit in the front row.
Yeah. It's never reserved.
Well, I do watch you at home.
Oh,
Reality TV.
that's some,
Virginia, John, I'll let you,
It's amazing.
I'll make sure, my admin Courtney, informs the Board of Health and Water Quality next time we have this discussion on our agenda. Before or after. I like the holistic approach and a recommendation to the Board of
I know.
Selectmen.
You can imagine what I'd like to see.
Please.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, we have a board. Another thing. Let's get everybody together.
Oh, yeah, I know, absolutely. Madam Chairman, can we take the next two agenda items out of
Those are
order
the
since
cheapest.
I don't
And this
think
is doesn't
Maria is
even-
here to
this
talk
just stores
about
until you pump it out.
breakaway panels?
Yes,
I
I
believe
would-
she's there to
I
talk
would
about
be-
How much
spacing.
does it cost to put?
entirely in favor of that. We need a motion.
I'll make the motion.
So
I'll
moved.
second it.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so moving on now to
Central wastewater
spacing
treatment
of
plants end up to
mitigation
3.
plants.
Yeah, so Maury brought this up,
do
and
a
I
lot
have
better.
heard from other landscape professionals and people in the field that your boilerplate 3-gallon, 3 feet on center
Yep.
sometimes is
Not appropriate.
not appropriate. It's not healthy for the plant community that we're trying to establish. So I think we're here to kind of loosen that up. A lot of times in the big restoration projects that you see, these whole-scale coastal bank restoration projects, we don't put that in the agenda. We go with the spacing that's on these plans.
But that's just a rule of thumb, right?
Yeah, it's just for your regular mitigation
It
plantings.
is, but we give out, we have this sheet that we give out to people, and what else are they gonna go by if we have a sheet that we give out?
Yeah, we have this like
And
planting
when I
sheet
read
that we
this
have to redo.
document from the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, my reaction was that maybe we should provide something a little more, like this, a little more descriptive and perhaps with more options, although I'm not so sure they all would be, well,
They're all native.
yeah, they're all native and they probably all would be suitable in some projects.
I'm just saying that you can still use the species that you'd like, we just need to loosen up that planting spec. Mark does feel very strongly about this subject. He does agree that sometimes it's not always appropriate with the 3 feet on center. He does want the opportunity to at least submit something to this board in writing or appear before you. But it's something that we have to start thinking about, and
Right.
maybe for the meantime, I mean, we just stick with the 3 feet on center. Usually, like I said, when we do get an established planting plan like you did last week for, I believe it was Fells Road, we go by that, you know? And so Mark's concern, I think, is more of the smaller, the way the plants grow, what's their growth pattern? Is it a dwarf variety, which we don't allow? Is it more considered a ground cover? And I think.
And what are the existing conditions?
And what are the existing conditions? What type of plants are we using? I mean, it's all very, very specific to the species we're using. I sent the Cape Cod Cooperative Extensions guidelines because it's fairly comprehensive and it gives us something to go on.
Yes.
And we could adopt this with the spacing requirements within this document, and then, again, not allow all the species within this document.
Yeah, that's an option.
That's an option.
I just think that, that there would, well, I don't see any harm in being a little more flexible or vague. You could even say in these handouts we give people and let them know that, these things are going to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and what they submit may be modified by us.
Absolutely, and I always say
but
that.
Provide something that gives some kind of explanation, or, gives them the ability to appreciate why that would be so.
Absolutely.
Courtney?
My sense is that these guidelines of 3 feet, 3 gallon and so forth were adopted a long time ago. They were adopted before I went on the board. And clearly, I think if you're looking from the standpoint of a client, most of them would rather have fewer plants than more.
Yes, well, I think that's probably why they were adopted, so that people didn't come in with one every 20 feet.
Yeah, the other part of that is that when a client hires a professional landscape architect, a landscaper who comes in and comes up with a plan, they understand, that certain plants are going to need more space and other ones aren't. And so they design a plan for that in mind. But if you have a small homeowner with a project comes in and wants mitigation,
Right.
The 3 foot, 3 feet is a kind of an easy standard for them to understand.
Right.
And it also provides them with, even if in the end that plan is modified, it at least gives them something they can sit down, make an easy calculation, go to the plant place and find out how much this is going to cost
Right.
to put in. So I agree we need to modify it, but we need to understand why we did this in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could, maintain that as an example of the, the kind of density we're looking for in an average case maybe, but explain that, things are site-specific, plant-specific, and, they may be given other guidance.
Oh, absolutely, and I can tell you, we sent the cooperative extension guidelines out as just kind of a starting point. I can honestly say, I've never seen an 8-foot wide arrowwood. They can get big, but they're not getting 8 feet wide. And I'm talking dead in the woods, I've seen these, and, not out of the, I've never seen them 8 feet wide. So, I mean, this is a guideline.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
GIS. It's a guide. Use it as a tool, modify it,
Right.
and we'll go from there.
Right, Betsy?
So I think we should keep 3 gallon, 3 feet on center as a default position. Anybody can come in with a plan that we can review and we can change. And if when they look at it, they say, well, I'd rather not do it, I'd rather do something else, we'd say, well, we'll entertain it.
Right.
What would you like to do? And then it comes before us. But for people who, like you say, who have a little project, well, that's what you do, and you can estimate how much it's gonna cost.
Right.
Otherwise, you get you or someone like you who says, well, you could do this, and you could have these different heights, which we would prefer. We would prefer something interesting. But sometimes people don't want to put that into their projects, but we would like to have that buffer.
Absolutely. Maury, you wanted this on the agenda.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on
Well,
that
I think
before
we-
we?
Well, I think that's one of the boilerplate of 3 gallon, 3 foot on center was there exactly for that purpose, for people that just said, you know what, this is easy. I have to put in this many square feet. They didn't want to do a landscape plan. They didn't want to have a landscape architect. They didn't want to spend a ton of money or time or effort. And they go, fine, I'm happy with all bayberry in the front yard.
Yeah.
3 gallon, 3 foot on center.
Seen some of those
And I think I think
Well, we've
more than
seen them
anything, that some of
10 years
the
beyond.
Yeah.
people out there don't know that they have this option, like when Blue Flax and Marie come in front of us, they have these very comprehensive plans that have biodiversity, for all sorts of things, not just a monoculture of bayberry or beach plum or
Incorporate plants for the
That-
site.
butterflies and for the site specific, instead of just taking the list and saying, well, bearberry is on the list, and we get 700 bearberry this tall, you know? So I think maybe just getting the word that you want to design it and bring it in front of us for us. to-
I've always said, I
know.
absolutely, from a staff point of view, I welcome and encourage and want to see diversity in these plantings.
And we haven't allowed,
Is that
if someone
written
comes
into
in
the-
just all bayberry, we don't allow
We
that
stopped,
anymore.
we stopped that a
I call
long
those
time ago.
cornfields,
No,
the
but
ones we see.
do we actually have in our regulations that we want diversity in the?
No, we put it in.
mitigation?
No, we
Jen
put
puts
it in.
Yeah.
Usually, if you're given, and the engineers know, even, I'll pick on Holmes McGrath, because I just pictured their plan. The guys, the designers of the project, let's say, you never see Jeff, but that's who we work with behind the scenes. He will write a mix of, and he'll list 6 or 8 plants, or 4 and 6 plants that will say, we want an equal mix or close to an equal mix, so we don't get, 12 bayberry and 1 little beach plum in there. Because, after 12 years, we've learned these things, and people watching me on TV might think I'm crazy, but I have gone out in the field and said, well, I have a mix, and there's 1 lone, beach
Whatever.
plum in there and a sea of bayberry, and it has happened. It's crazy, but it has. So we do see these plans. They are more diverse. They do fall back sometimes on that 3 feet on center. It's easy. I like the default, but on the large-scale planting plans, we have modified them, and we take that condition right out, and we go right to the plan that was presented and approved by this board.
Maria?
Can we hear from the board and then Maria, please?
Sorry.
I think we should mention or reference the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension recommendations,
Oh, yeah.
so that if someone wants to dig further, instead of the default 3x3.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what Betsy says. If they want to
Yeah.
present something to this board, everybody can have the document, some of the, and other times, and this, we've seen this too, a lot of plants aren't really appropriate for every situation this board
Right.
sees. This board sees inland wetland plants, this board sees coastal, very harsh environments on coastal banks. You see buffer plantings right up against a salt marsh. So you don't want to use the same plants in each instance. So what I always tell people is, or I try to tell the engineers and the landscapers such as Maria, the landscape professionals, is to go out when you're reviewing a site and you're proposing something to a homeowner, or you're proposing something to this board, is go out and, I don't know, look around to the adjacent properties and see what naturally grows there, instead of trying to import bayberry onto every property where it might not be appropriate. So we have tried that as well. I mean, the staff is open to all these things. But yes, I agree with you, Peter. This is a starting point. It's a guide. It's not a definitive, this needs to be done this way, but it is a guideline, and that's why these documents are produced.
Courtney?
I would, as part of this, I'd love to see Rosa Rugosa brought out of purgatory. Because it does fit
It
in
works.
certain very exposed.
Yes, it can be useful for sure, yeah.
I think Mark had something.
Mark?
He agreed.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I
mean,
couldn't
I've
find
heard-
sycamore oak on anybody's chart. I looked at them all.
I've heard numerous discussions at various meetings we've had about what will grow there. I've never heard anybody say anything about what is good habitat. What plants, and that might end up.
A
if we-
wildlife
if we would-
habitat, for the wildlife habitat of a
right.
plant.
It
Oh,
does come
absolutely.
up once in a while.
And unfortunately, all the properties I've looked at which have had mitigation in the past, I'd say 99% of them look like hell. They're just a bunch of plants on 3-foot centers that aren't growing very well because they weren't very well watered or
Maintained.
something.
Yeah.
And for all you know, they were planted yesterday instead of 5 years ago, as far as how they managed to succeed. So it's sort of frustrating to go through all this, making a plan, and 3 feet centers and bayberry and bearberry and whatever, low bush blueberry, and then nothing comes of it. But the habitat, this is not something I know anything about, of course, so I can ask the question. I don't know much about habitat, and I'd sure like to hear something real about it, not just a standard stock. Somebody will get a book and say, oh, habitat, these are good for butterflies or whatever. But somehow make it consistent, as you're saying, with what grows there, but also what should grow there from a, what sort
From
of
what should grow there from a wildlife
is in that
habitat
area.
perspective, absolutely, I agree with that. There's something you said that I had just keyed in on but lost it when Courtney's pen just came shooting off the table. It'll come to me, short little plants.
That's Kevin's job.
That's one of the reasons, going back to a project you recently had, this is where I'm going with this, that we want the plants placed prior to construction, and people say, well, we have these 3 years to put the plants in, is because we don't want people to just pop the plants in the ground, write us a letter, we want compliance, we go out like a couple of weeks later, we sign off, and then all the plants die. So that's one of the reasons, and I think Betsy articulated it very well in that amended order discussion of why we require the plants to be put in prior to construction if it's possible, because it gives them the opportunity to establish, to survive, and then they are doing their function as a buffer for wildlife habitat, a food source, a cover, nutrient uptake, and, before the project's over and the applicant's seeking compliance.
I take some exception to that, because we do have a 3-year requirement, so,
But
it's
you
not
just
like
made
when
the
they finish
statement that
building, they
everything
walk
looks like
away.
hell and everything just looks like it's been popped in the ground and walked away. This way, we're able to monitor the
You get the first year
mitigation
look.
and make sure that it is providing the function and performing, I'm gonna say function again, but basically, it's a mitigation. An applicant is asking to do something within this board's jurisdiction. The flip side of that is, okay, you're asking to increase the impervious surface, increase the size of the structure, modify the patio, whatever, you need to provide this buffer. Well, then provide the buffer, make sure the buffer is functioning as a buffer for multiple reasons, habitat, nutrient uptake, anything, so that, it's actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Slowing down the ocean.
Yeah.
Slowing down the ocean
Coming at your house.
Yeah.
But that,
Oh, absolutely.
our job is to protect the environment, but it also
And there were a
protects the
lot of
homeowner.
cases, and again, Mark, this is, we learned this, that we did see when I first started, quite a few certificates of compliance coming in when the plants hadn't been there the week before, and then they're not cared for, and unfortunately, the town just doesn't have the resources to follow through with every property that's out there. They're just too busy. So this is a way of ensuring compliance and ensuring that the buffers are functioning like this board, So, and it's a win-win, because you don't want a property owner just to spend the money to pop the plants in just for the sake of doing it and then have them die. That's not accomplishing anything.
This reminds me, it's not exactly the same issue, but it reminds me that I think in the handout, not in the regulations necessarily, but it would be nice to also make people aware of the time of year when different plants prefer to be planted at different times of year, and stock of certain plants is better at different times of the year. Not so much like we're going to give them an encyclopedia about this consideration for all the plants, but just so that when they are planning, they think to ask at the nursery or ask somebody about these kinds of things, or just keep this kind of thing in mind. Maria, we'll get you up here.
I know, I have to stand before I fall asleep.
You've been very patient.
No, I have 2 speeds, like 200 miles an hour, and then
Yeah,
sleeping. Maria Hickey Landscapes, and thank you so much for having me here tonight and giving me the opportunity to kind of share our perspective from the field about this discussion of 3 feet, 3 gallon, 3 feet on center. So every project that we come into, sometimes we get the attitude from the client that mitigation is a punishment. And we look at it to educate the clients as it's an opportunity to provide a functioning wildlife habitat for the birds, the bees, different types of insects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we can make it by the way that we design and include different types of plants, like it's been there forever. And not only is it going to survive, but it's going to thrive. And the one thing that we feel we get handcuffed on is that 3 feet center on center rule. And I understand why, because Mark and I have had a lot of discussions about it. And his thing was that if you say 4, if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. Sure. So if you tell them it's 4 feet, then they're really going to go 5 feet. And my response to that is, well, that's why you have your compliance check. And my workers, I mean, I practically drill this into them. You know, we're out there with the yardsticks, and we lay them out 3 feet in all directions, because I put the fear of God, and I said, no, Jen's going to come out, and she's measuring, and you're in trouble if it doesn't measure 3 feet.
Do you do that in every town?
So Falmouth is the only one that requires 3 gallon, 3 feet on center. So that, not that I wanted to compare us to other towns, but like in Mashpee and Barnstable, it's 4 feet. And what that does for us is that allows us to use plants that in Falmouth it's really hard to use, because it's basically like you dig a trench and you put the plants in and all the root balls are touching when you're 3 feet on center. And that's not an optimal way to plant. You want to provide space for the roots to grow, and if they're against another root ball, they're not going to thrive. They're going to survive, but they're not going to thrive. And we want this to be a one and done. That's what I tell every client. We're going to do this the right way. We're going to pick the right plants based on your site conditions, and even right down to the colors depending on what we're trying to accomplish. So, for example, and I wanted Mark to come out to the Falmouth Mall project that we're doing. There's a difference between white Clethra alnifolia and pink Clethra. I'm so tired. Ruby spice. And ruby spice is much bigger. It's like a 3 gallon size. Got to be at least as tall as me and about this wide. And the difference between the white and the pink is that butterflies and hummingbirds are more attracted to pink than they are white. So if you're trying to create a functioning wildlife habitat to attract your hummingbirds and your bees and your butterflies, it's more favorable to put a pink Clethra in. And yet, with that 3 feet on center, it's too overcrowded. So I just kind of wanted to share that perspective. We use pink Clethra all the time in the other towns because we can go 4 feet on center, and that's exactly what we do, 4 feet on center. So at the Falmouth Mall project, we've included just heavier bands of pink flowering echinacea, phlox, and other perennials to try to pull in. And Jen can tell you, because she's gone down at least once and saw, butterflies, dragonflies. I don't think you saw any hummingbirds today that you were there, but
it also really
Yeah.
depends on where we're planting these things and everything.
Sure.
The mall is different. It's a more of a colorful kind of landscaping design using plants, but a lot of the native plants we don't want the varieties. We want the straight up Clethra alnifolia. I don't want pink lady slipper. We want the native plant variety that we're going to, when I go out into BB Woods or any of the conservation parcels, I'm going to see it in the field. That's what the board wants. So I think that there are opportunities to relax those 3 feet on center regs. You just need to come to us and say, this is what my planting scheme's going to do, and we're going to do it. But I get your concern. I get Mark's concern, and Mark does want the ability to address this board.
And I think, by saying with your compliance check, if you're telling the homeowner, they're gonna come out and they're gonna measure, you better be, right on your measurements. And it's okay, to tell people, hey, you need to put more plants in, you don't have enough density. Viburnum is another one that's tough.
Yep.
It's 3 feet on center is too close.
It is too close for viburnums.
And, yes.
Excuse me. I was going to call on Maureen.
Oh, sorry.
Waiting.
Oh,
waiting.
I'm sorry.
Just one point too, that in a lot of these plantings, when we have mitigation planting, you'll see how the engineer always stands in front of us and says, we have to do 3-to-1 mitigation, and it has to be 385 square feet.
Yeah.
3 gallons, 3 foot on center. They can do more, and I think the other night we had one that was, Dave Martin did it with the Armstrong guy, Bill.
Armstrong.
And they did their mitigation, but then they also added some really nice
Yeah, I like that
non-natives
plan.
in there, so
Yeah.
that the people don't feel that they're being punished.
Yeah.
Like, I have to look at a viburnum and a bayberry and a beach plum, they're really not that attractive. Whereas if they could throw in a few things that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and
So-
And I
Maria's
do
done
that-
that on a
that's
number
standard,
I know,
of.
yeah.
that's why
yeah.
their landscapes look so beautiful, because
Yeah.
they have added.
They've
on
added
top
a
of just their
perennial
300
bed.
square feet, they've added
Yeah, we
400
always
square
do.
feet and thrown
Yep,
some
always.
ornamentals in there to make it a little more interesting, and the clients then look out the window and go, wow, that's really pretty, not punishment.
Yeah,
I've seen
right.
a
Wonder
number
if I can get
of
away with cutting that.
them done like that from Maria and others, where,
Yeah.
it is
Blue
a
flax
really
and-
nice mix. It's not your standard bayberry, and we want people to be able to enjoy their environment and not feel the need to just mow it down.
And feel it's an investment. that,
Absolutely.
That they're not being punished, that it's an investment in their
Absolutely.
landscape.
And one of the other things on the similar subject, because you kind of jogged my mind on something. I try to encourage the client, when we're laying out, when we're working with, like Jeff Johnson and the other side engineers, when we're laying out that square footage on the site plan, I love to work with curves and not a block.
Talk to your engineer friends.
And I'm getting them to now see that, I get out and I go right over their lines. And then you see our color bands when we come in on our site plans. And that's from me saying, we have to add these curves. We want this to look beautiful and timeless, like it's been there forever. If you stick a rectangle of mitigation plants on somebody's property,
That's what it looks like.
right? So that's one thing that I feel like we try to bring to the table on our projects, and I know that some of the other landscapers do as well. And on the homeowners that come in, maybe talk to them about that as well. In addition to your square footage, it doesn't have to be a square. It can be an oval, or a kidney-shaped type of thing. And the other thing that I just wanted to say about the 3 feet on center rule, the other struggle that we have with that is a lot of times we find, even though we're not under the drip line of the tree, we'll find big roots from the tree that have extended out into our planting area, and it makes it really, really difficult to dig those holes
Right.
without damaging the
That's
roots.
why we don't want you to plant under trees.
Yeah, well, no, I'm
She's
saying
beyond,
further out from
beyond
the drip
there
line.
even.
Sometimes 10 feet out from the drip line, you're still finding especially
No,
with
I
cherry
know.
trees and some of the other ones have lateral roots. And, it puts us in a difficult predicament because we want to be in compliance, yet we don't want to injure the root of a tree or hurt ourselves trying to, dig that hole, type
Peter?
of thing.
Yes. Maria, what's your opinion of the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension guidelines? Are you familiar with those?
I have not read it, to be honest with you, so I would love to read it.
Okay, Jen has a copy, and you don't have to answer right away.
I took speed reading in college.
Like I
And
said,
I'm
it's a
reading it.
guideline, and
Yes.
that's how I would like
Yeah.
this board
And
to
I'm
use. I wouldn't
reading
use it as an end-all document,
Right.
but there are
I
some.
mean, it's like, so just by
A
looking at
resource,
this
really.
really,
Yeah, it's a
really
resource.
quick, and Jen knows this and Mark knows this, every hole that we dig, obviously we go wider and deeper, and I use what's called 50-50. It's 50% loam and 50% compost. And the reason why is compost has 60 nutrients that break down over a 9 to 12 month period, and it's a consistent feed to the root system of the plant. So you end up with very healthy, vigorous root growth, foliar growth, and a much healthier plant. We also, have a couple other things that we do to help keep that plant super healthy. And the one other thing I did want to ask, or not even ask, but just kind of piggyback on that regulation on some of the projects where you're required to put the plants in before construction of the house starts. And I agree with that in like 95% of the times, but sometimes you have an issue where they're doing masonry on the project, and every time, even with silt sock, hay bales, you always get the masons that are sticking the hose over the silt
Well, they
fence.
shouldn't be doing that, so I don't want to hear
Okay.
about the masons,
Okay.
disregarding my limit of work.
Okay,
But just to go, Peter,
happens.
every document
Yeah.
I send you is to be used as a resource and not, well, the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension says this and this is the way we're
Yeah.
going to do it.
Well,
Take it as a resource.
I was interested in Maria's opinion.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
of that.
Oh, yeah.
And-
This document's always cited and with a lot
Yeah.
of the landscape professionals that we work with.
yep. And these are good guidelines, I just skimmed through it really fast. And the other thing to point out is with burlap, there's a synthetic burlap and there's a biodegradable burlap, and not everybody knows that. So there's synthetic burlap, if you can't tell the difference and you just leave the burlap tied up around the tree, you're in trouble. I mean, we always on everything untie it and peel it away. But biodegradable obviously breaks down, and it's to hold the structure of your root ball together, especially on your trees. Some of them, the way that they're packed, you need to hold that root ball together. If you undo the burlap and the root ball breaks apart, you've just compromised your root structure in some instances, and it could lead to the death of the tree.
Okay, Betsy.
Mar- who- was that
That's-
Steve?
I'm sorry, I just planted a tree.
Oh, just,
Wasn't that
that was quick. Maria, I
Yes.
just want you, when your clients might be sort of complaining about how to put in mitigation plantings, not just to remind them of the biological and ecological aspects, but they also play a major role in protecting the
Someone's
resources that are, quote, downstream from
Yeah.
them. They're picking up nutrients,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
taking up water, they're slowing down sediment, they're minimizing erosion, and that's all what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
But for the homeowner herself or himself, it's also protecting from any attack of the ocean during a storm.
Exactly. Well, and
So it
it's
has to-
stabilizing,
Right.
you
Yep.
know, your resource area.
Right.
And I always say it with laughter, and I was like, well, you do want to build this house or do this project, right? Because that's the deal you made. Because sometimes they forget that, They feel
Yeah.
like you're making them doing something. Well, you don't have to build that house.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Nobody's
Don't
putting a
have
gun
to
to your
do the
head.
project.
How often does that go over?
They laugh. I laugh. I make a joke about it. I was like, you could donate the land to, the bird sanctuary, get a tax write-off, right?
Okay, I've allotted 9 o'clock,
Okay.
Yeah,
guys,
okay,
so.
Well, thank you so much
Yeah.
for just allowing me to share my 2 cents about the topic.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you for
everything
coming.
that we do is for the health of the plants, and, certainly, just to reiterate, in some instances, it's overcrowding.
Yeah, no, that's.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Your point well taken.
Thank you.
Courtney.
Yeah, you've given
Thanks
us
for coming in.
food for thought.
Oh, yeah,
I
thank
think-
you very much.
I think this has been constructive. I just, an observation, typically contractors and homeowners look at their construction projects, and the last thing that gets done is the landscaping.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
And I think part of what perhaps we ought to work toward as a board when we write our orders of conditions, And again, it's gonna have to be project-specific, because every project and every is different. But that we have them create a construction sequencing that includes the installation of mitigation plantings during the course of the project, where it fits into the process. Quite clearly, you don't want to put mitigation plantings in where a mason is going to come along and build a 4-foot wall and be excavating and tear out the plants. But there are also places on
We
that
don't,
project.
Courtney.
No, but I think that this should be built into the order, a kind of construction sequence that takes into account the planning.
I'm not writing orders of conditions and anticipating someone's construction sequence. They're gonna have to provide
Well,
that.
no, that's right, that's fine.
Yeah.
And if planning's have to,
But then you
they have to be done
incorporate.
ahead of time.
And
There's-
if you have
And then protect it.
yeah, and if you have a project where you wanna see that done, where you wanna see, you know, a wall built and then the plants immediately put on them, then this board needs to request that sequence from them. The staff's not gonna second guess the sequence of
Well,
a
and it's not
construction
our
project.
job to design these projects.
No, it's not.
And the other last thing, smaller plants, I know Marie didn't bring it up and I thought she would. Smaller plants do transplant better.
Yeah, they
The
do.
larger the plant, the more chance of them not surviving.
Yeah.
So that's why I think in the past, we've been,
Well, I
used to
also-
say that 7-foot to 8-foot cedars, and we're digressing, and we're saying, we'd rather have 10 little cedars that are gonna live than 5 big ones that are gonna die. And you see them, the big scorched torch looking cedar.
And I think you have to understand, Mark's concern with this comes after almost 2 decades of dealing with compliance
compliances.
issues in this town and seeing the way that certain mitigation requirements are
Ignored, right.
manipulated.
Or totally ignored.
Yeah, so, I mean, he does have, if we go to 4 feet, then he's gonna see these 1-gallon twig plants, 4
Yeah.
feet on center, and then everybody mows them down. I mean,
I know.
But
this
like we've
is,
already said, if you have a guideline, a rule of thumb, but
Right.
then you allow the landscapers or the engineers to
some leeway, and that's
design
what we do.
something
Right.
different or
We
more
could-
specific to
right.
the
We do that
site.
all the time.
That, we
Nothing
do
wrong
it
with
all the
that.
time. It just, I mean, if we're gonna put it on paper, we could just say, these are the general guidelines. And if you're gonna deviate from that, please get approval of beforehand.
Yeah, simple.
It's, you do that all the time in your order of conditions. If
Right.
you have an established planting plan, the condition that says 3 gallon, 3 feet on center is taken out. We go by the planting plan that this board has approved. I don't
Right.
try to, unless we have talked to them about modifying it, or you'll hear me tell Teresa, I don't like the sweet fern, we're gonna modify that. They know how we're gonna modify it.
Right, I understand. I just mean, for the benefit of people maybe who don't use a
There are a lot-
landscaper or anybody, just going in to let them know that's how we operate.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Okay, let's move along to use of breakaway panels. Peter sent out today, or had Jen send it out, this nice summary from FEMA, and I was looking at a document that's about 40 pages, and it's pretty much the same, except it's got all the engineering detail, and my reaction from the standpoint of what we care about is that it seems kind of clear to me that FEMA discourages this kind of thing. The premiums are higher,
Yeah.
they have a
That was
lot of
impressive.
caveats about it, so that's what that's what struck me about this document and the FEMA guidance, and so, anyway, anybody else?
Well,
One of the things I noticed about the FEMA one, which was interesting to read, they're more concerned because, of course, insurance and money, and it costs them.
Right.
So a lot of theirs is more concerned about the cost. There's really when you read this, it's not really about the environment. They even
Right.
have
Oh,
in
gosh,
here.
no.
nothing like
Yeah.
that.
So the
But,
storage thing, they did have one point. Breakaway walls must break away cleanly and must not damage the elevated building when they do so. Well, that's great. It might not hurt their building, but when they fly away, the poor guy behind them gets wrecked. And I think that's what a lot of the people, and I totally get it. They're homely. When they're on stilts, they're homely. I wish everybody would drive by 90, I think it's 97 Old Dock Road. And I wasn't on the surf drive water today, so I couldn't say anything. But we had one, and it was on Old Dock Road. It was an old house that was raised and rebuilt. They had to go up, they were in the V zone, and they were not allowed breakaway panels. And this was a raise and rebuild, and the house had been there 100 years. But they did something really clever, and I think these engineers have to get a little more clever. They took and planted espaliered holly
No, yeah.
in between
That's nice.
each column. It's absolutely beautiful. You go by and you would never even know. The tide can go in, the tide can go out, you know, they're salt tolerant plants. So there are ways to not make these so ugly, but what they have become, and everybody knows this, they elevate the house and they've become another floor to fill with stuff. And the garages, yes, you need to put your car somewhere, put them underneath, that's wonderful. But again,
Doesn't
drive
look good.
around and, I mean, another old plumbing, heating, sheetrock. You know, once we walk away, once there's a wall around it, it's behind the curtain that Mr. Wizard of Oz can never be seen again, that all of this stuff starts to be built.
Yes.
And then it's no longer breakaway.
I was thinking of some of the ones that we had built, and we said that the ground floor couldn't have living space.
Oh,
That's
Black Beach.
ridiculous.
Black Beach.
Yeah.
you made
No,
it work.
that's an absolute, and unfortunately, this board has been talked into a lot of things over the years. I will bring up a point that one of the representatives that you see quite often, we had a brief discussion today about this issue. They do want the opportunity to address this board, is that it's new construction, this board's been pretty consistent, no breakaway panels. It's the raise and rebuild, it's the you know, you have
The argument is this is better than having the whole house.
having the whole house in, and, well, you know, I've gone from,
Well, 97
You know.
Old, 97 Old Dock, you didn't.
I went from
Well,
1,200
I don't buy
square
that, but I'm
feet
saying that's the argument.
in the velocity zone, footprint, to I'm only enclosing 900 square feet, in which my response well, now how many floors do you have on the house? So, I mean, I think the argument from the flips, from a representative point of view is they're making the situation
Better,
better.
but not as good as it could be.
They're
Yes.
making it better for title surge, but then you've elevated these things, and down in Florida and the BVI, the ones that were elevated, great, the tide went underneath them and everything else, but the roofs all blew
Yes,
off.
right.
So then I mean, it really,
Yeah.
it's tough, but
What about making the distinction between the breakaway panel and flow-through type setup?
the problem with flow-through is, again, well, yeah, maybe flow-through would be better, because
Well-
then at least.
When you say flow-through, what do you mean?
They-
Well,
well,
take
there's the Walker Street
as an
house.
example,
Like in
because
the A
the way,
zone?
what we allowed there,
Which one?
Walker Street.
Okay.
97.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
the
made it
one
look
with
like
the
a
slats.
fence.
There's a
Surf drive-in.
substantial space, so it doesn't really create any privacy. It doesn't really lend itself to becoming closed space.
Right.
Not to say it can't, but.
Right,
Yeah.
And
they're not sheetrocking it.
they're not sheetrocking it, and I was reading the FEMA thing, thank you, by the way.
Yeah, like-
Yeah, that was
And,
really
you know,
useful.
some of the flow-through effect solves that problem without creating a projectile, and it does help a little bit aesthetically, and I'm not saying don't do anything,
Right.
you know, plant-wise, but maybe it's something we could look at as far as, and I'm just using the generic term of flow-through, something that's, it really doesn't afford privacy.
Something like lattice work, flow-through.
It's also
But the
not
thing about
secure in terms of, you know, there's, people wouldn't be encouraged to put a lot of stuff down there
Well,
because it's
lattice
not
work
secure.
unfortunately is, you know, if they do
Well,
the
not-
one by one.
and I'm not
yeah.
suggesting lattice work, but lattice,
Oh,
in
sorry.
the strictest definition, isn't, you know, the lattice you buy at the lumberyard, but,
Right.
because, you know, Walker Street would be considered lattice,
Right.
you know. But it's the spacing, and I don't know how specific we can get, does it have to be a minimum of 3-inch spacing? But over there, and I didn't measure it, but maybe it's 3-inch space, a 1x6 board, so it camouflages all the piers, it camouflages the elevator shaft and the stairway, so there's some aesthetic value there. But I think if there was a storm surge,
Would it hold up in a
It's
piece of
not an
hold up?
obstruction.
it wouldn't be a problem.
You think, well, you think that sort of, I mean, I'm still skeptical about Walker Street, with a good storm surge and wave action on those, they're just not, and they're wood panels.
I don't know if we're talking about the same job.
The first one we did, the one with the ladder,
Yeah.
the big boards that they.
Yeah.
You don't think that, you think that would,
Oh, I've seen the,
Waves in the velocity zone?
they just smash that stuff to smithereens. That's why the breakaway panel is, that's
well,
what it's,
if I remember correctly, that one was designed
But
to
what's
be,
designed?
it was,
to break
to use the
away.
word hinged.
Yeah, hinge.
No, I think that one's hinged,
Yeah.
actually.
But again.
But
when
what
they-
I'm getting at, so if we're both right on that,
Yep.
that it's, the spacing is what I think it is, and it is hinged, is that the sort of thing that, that kind of solves both issues?
Well, maybe we just
If
put
it's a
it,
bad
there's
enough
no
storm,
storage underneath
it's gonna
them,
go.
0.
You-
The
you-
problem is if they're enclosed, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't see it, and that's the whole thing when I first started and you guys had this thing, well, no living space, no storage. There's absolutely no way you can
Enforce that.
enforce that.
I
And I don't
agree.
care what
Oh.
engineer stands up there and says, oh, well, you can enforce it. No, you can't.
Right.
But if it's, I'll tell you, when people have
Need
open
an
piles,
army to
they're not
enforce
so apt to put stuff under there, because then it becomes an eyesore to them as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
Right.
So that's what deters more storage, is
Right.
by not having anything underneath. The breakaway panels, I've seen them down in Florida, and I've seen what they've done. My dad lived right on the water, and the breakaway panels, everybody had all the stuff inside, and the breakaway panels do not move.
Yeah.
So it's just like a big plow, and then everything just blows to smithereens because nothing can move anymore.
This is what I wanted to talk to Jamie about. Jamie, how are they? And Courtney Moore, Kevin, if you know anything, you can jump in. When they're designed, are they, and this is one thing I could never, are they designed to flip inward? Are they
Inward.
designed to flip out?
And then
Are
come
they
back.
designed to
They
collapse?
go back and forth.
This
They
way to
go
go,
both
they
ways.
hinge.
depending
Yeah, so
on-
they're hinged on the top to basically,
They could be
at a
five
certain,
ways.
Dual action
certain
hinge.
amount of force, they break, and then they hinge.
And they pivot.
And they
for lack of a
pivot,
better word.
Yeah.
and so, however,
And then when the
Yeah, you
tidal
want
surge
them to
comes back,
accommodate
they
whatever
swing
wind
back. It's like a
direction
barroom
you got.
door, just this way.
yeah,
Well,
like a cat door.
Yeah, like a cat door. And that's the problem, is as soon as you put something behind it, it can't move
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And like I say, we are creatures of habit of storing things, and as soon as you put a wall up, nobody can see, it
Well,
becomes storage.
The person I had this particular conversation with today, I said, I've actually gone into my house after one of these discussions one night, gone into my basement and gone, okay, what would I get rid of? What, if I were, moving into one of these homes with these breakaway panels, what could I live without in my basement?
What did you say?
Nothing. I could probably call a couple of boxes, but other than that, no.
Your bicycles, your kayaks, your canoes, your paddle boards, your
Christmas,
grills,
your
Christmas decorations, yeah,
Christmas
because they have no storage now,
decorations.
most of them.
Your children's furniture.
I mean,
It's, you have stuff,
like an
and that's the
experience
problem. I think I remember a particular conversation once with one of our more animated engineers, and we got into the discussion.
Shall we take a?
Let's just take a wild guess, you guys are gonna know. And they were proposing breakaway panels on a garage that was going to house a car over the winter, and our discussion was,
I remember that one.
you remember the engineers, and I think I literally went like
Yeah,
this.
remember what-
Well, if the car's parked here, and it goes, and the wall's supposed to go, doesn't it get caught on the car?
Remember that one?
yeah.
We all remember that one.
So it is an issue, and it's something this board, and I told told Kevin the other day, I've told Peter, this is an issue that this board has grappled with
For a long.
for a
time.
long time. And I think when I don't want you guys to make a decision right now, I do want you to talk to the representatives that come before you, and is the one thing I hear is, well, if we're making the situation better on a raise and rebuild, is there any leeway? Is there any leeway? And they said, well, if we reduce it a certain percentage, and I go, great. We say, okay, as long as you reduce it by a certain percentage, and I said, I wouldn't, I will bet anything that somebody will come in and say, well, I reduced it by 5%.
Yeah.
So unless you give a certain percentage now, and it's difficult.
I would like to encourage our architects and our engineers to be more creative, because there are some very attractive homes that have been raised, are R-A-Z-E-D.
And then
or
raised.
R-A-I-S-E-D, and do not have breakaway panels, but are attractive. They're attractive in the neighborhood, that people are happy with the way they look.
And I think this
And
is
I'm sure there are other ideas that are out there.
I think this is a discussion that I do want you to hear from some of the people that routinely come before you, and maybe they have some ideas, maybe they have some concerns. You need to listen to those concerns, even though you listen to them every week. But if this is, I think they just, what the permitting community, let's put it that way, the permitting community is looking for is absolute solid guidance. Will you allow it? Will you not? How much will you allow? Will you allow a small, walk-in mudroom area? We have to encase the elevator. Will you allow the enclosures of garage, which I don't think we're heading in that direction, but I could be wrong. And they just want it very clear because they don't feel the regulations right now are clear.
Right.
That's for sure.
Courtney?
Yeah, I agree with Jen on that. I think we have to be clear in our minds what we allow. I'm not sure I personally buy the old house versus the new house. Because if you ask a Category 5 hurricane, which thing is it gonna do?
It's not gonna it's not gonna distinguish. So, I think we write our guidelines across the board. And, I'm intrigued by the Walker Street experiment where they have slats, or whatever you wanna call it, as part of their breakaway panels. And the question is, does it make sense to design something like 6 inches on center, something like that? I wouldn't go any less than that. And the other thing is, when we're considering breakaway panels, it's not just storm surge and wind, but it's also debris-driven stuff. And that's you put obstacles in there, whether it's a panel or lattice, and that's gonna act like a dam. And I've just finished reading the McCulloch's book on the Johnstown flood. And when that dam let go, there was a huge bridge in Johnstown. And all the debris all the way from the top piled up against that. Along with people and everything, horses and dogs, it caught on fire. It was a horrible thing. And, so when we're allowing these breakaway panels to, are we creating that kind of a situation?
That's usually why we argue against it.
I mean, it's not just water and wind. I mean, it's the debris. Yeah.
They're down there. They're all waving their arms.
Would it be as
Mary?
Yeah.
I would like to get Jen's input as to the history of the involvement of breakaway enclosures with the Conservation Committee. Just being new, it seems like it would be the purview of the building department instead of the Conservation Department.
Well, we have a regulation about construction, raised construction in the V zone, and it says open piles only. And then the engineers come in with, we want to use breakaway panels. and we get into a discussion about it. And, you know, I think we're getting more and more consistent about not wanting them.
I think you are.
But that's kind of how it happened. It's that, you know, regulations say something, then they propose something that's, you know, in the state building code, it's all, in all the building codes. And we're, you know, we have to deliberate on whether or not that's okay.
But our responsibility is the environment.
Right.
And when these breakaway panels break away, which they do sometimes,
Yeah.
it
Wreaks havoc.
reeks. That's the word.
Wreaks havoc.
Wreaks
Wreaks
havoc.
havoc.
So what
On all kinds of areas, and they're all over the place. After a storm, I mean, look at the pictures from Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands or any of
Hurricane
the
Bob.
islands.
Hurricane
Stuff
Bob
is
here.
all over the place.
Well, I'm just questioning whether it should be in our committee or a different committee. I'm not questioning the fact that it's bad to spread all the storm damage around. I'm questioning parking the car would block the breakaway panels. I'm just questioning the history of the involvement of this committee.
The history is in 1998, the regulations were changed. The land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is your velocity zone, was added into your regulations. It is a protected, a jurisdictional resource area by the Conservation Commission. The gentleman that wrote the regulations at that time placed several performance standards within land subject to coastal storm flowage, and that goes to a proposed project within the velocity zone shall not destroy or otherwise impair the function of any portion of said landform or shall not have an adverse effect on adjacent wetland resource areas. Activities and their ancillary uses in velocity zones which result into the alteration to vegetative cover, interruptions to the sediment supply, interruptions in the sediment to other wetland resource areas, changes to the form or volume of a dune or beach will have an adverse effect on said landform's ability to provide storm damage prevention and flood control, and therefore are prohibited. These activities include and are not limited to new structures, including building sheds, garages, and additions, and substantial improvements to existing structures, foundations other than open pilings or columns, new or proposed expansions of road, driveways, parking lot, new septic systems, new coastal engineering structures. So the board has always grappled with this foundation of open pilings or columns. It has to be an open piling or a column. There's another section in this regulation where it says you cannot have a sheer wall. Yes, and I can find it real quick, a sheer wall. So those are the little nuances in the regulations that this board struggles with. I happen to know the gentleman that wrote these regulations in '98 for this commission. My staff attends a breakfast meeting that he puts on for all the other coastal towns almost once a month. When asked if you can build a house in the velocity zone in the town of Falmouth, he says, absolutely not, the regulations prohibit it. In his mind, when he wrote these regulations, you prohibited new construction in a velocity zone and the use of breakaway panels. It has to be open pilings. That is not the way.
And I was
As
on the board
any
at that time.
regulation comes before you, you'll have the permitting community come and try to represent their client to the best of their ability and start saying, well, what if we did this, and what if we read it like that, and what if we, approach this regulation this way, and eventually, breakaway panels were part of that discussion before this board, and then this board began to see how problematic those decisions allowing them were, and started to retreat back and say, no, we're going to stick with this open piling provision in our regulation. Am I wrong, guys?
No.
Those who have been on the board for a while.
And that all started, like everything, it's a knee-jerk reaction. It was after Hurricane Bob. And we would be sitting here till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning with piles of everybody's stuff that needed to be done so they could get building permits. And that was, after we got through that mess, it took about 4 years, then we all agreed it was time to rewrite our regs, and one of the major ones was V-zones. And getting these things out of harm's way, out of the resource areas, out of danger zones for, you know, the resources and people, and that's why it was written like that. That's why I have no, because I guess I can wrap my head around it, because we spent months, 2 nights a week for months, doing rewriting those regs. And it was clear to all of us that were on the board at the time, exactly what we said, which was no, and I think the 200 square feet was the only, if you had a building that was already there, you could add 200 square feet, which didn't prohibit people to put a little deck on or whatever. After 200 feet, you don't get another bite of the pie. That is it for the life of that property. You never get any more. And I mean, we just don't have the staff. There are some that I see that I'm like, I swear they put a deck on there 200 square feet like in 2005. And now they're asking for another 200 square feet. Then the next thing they do is they tear the house down, and now all of that house goes up.
Right.
It actually adds another roof, because most of them are little cottages, and they were 1 story. Now they're 2.5 stories squished, and they squish them so that they can get 2.5 stories, and then they put lattice and breakaway panels. So actually, they've given themselves 3.5 stories with their little 1-bedroom cottage. And that's why those regs were written after all the Surf Drive houses blew off their little places.
It's the collective
Blew across the
memory.
street.
But the tricky thing with all that,
Goes
all
after
that,
about 20 years.
So that's the
20,
history,
25
Peter,
years.
The
that I know of.
Thank you.
Mark?
the tricky thing with that evolution of the house, to my mind, you gotta tie it to the
Impacts.
resource protection. I don't care how big the house is, and I don't care if he's got 5 garages under it, the question, does it provide storm damage prevention and flood control? Or does it degrade it? If it does, can't do it. But if it doesn't degrade it, then let them go. I think we've got to always keep in mind, not, you know, aesthetic issues that you or I
Well-
might have or something, but
But
doesn't-
Mark, you weren't here, you didn't live here.
No, I wasn't involved in
And when you went over at Salt Pond's property, over on Surf Drive, and all of those cabanas were in the salt pond.
oh, I've seen
started.
hundreds
And on-
of boats dragged up out of the marsh
I don't
too,
care
but
about
they don't
boats.
get, they don't get prevented from being
Yeah,
used.
we're not in charge of boats. We're in
Well-
charge of structures in the V zone. And actually, probably our boats, because every boat that's on a mooring is in a V zone. But that, it was a resource issue. That was the problem. All of this flotsam and jetsam stayed over in these marshes and these ponds and these dunes for years, because once it was gone, nobody went to go get it. So that is why putting everything under these buildings goes away. Nobody wants it anymore.
Yeah.
So it just goes onto the resources, the salt marshes, the salt ponds, the
It's the
harbors, or
last thing
whatever.
people are gonna do when
Yeah.
when a storm's
This is-
coming, is
this
worry
is one of
about what's
those-
underneath
And
the
that's the
house.
other thing, we had one in front of us that they said that they were going to have a water widget. Is that right?
Yep,
So that when it felt water, the doors were gonna come
remember
up.
that one? Don't you remember that one?
Yes. And then it was also gonna be tied into
I'm not that
a caretaker, that when the water widget went off, the caretaker was gonna get the call. Have you ever tried to just move your deck furniture in a hurricane?
Yeah, right.
Let alone the contents of an entire enclosed garage of 1,000,000 boxes of all the things that you can't put upstairs anymore because you have no attic.
And you'll never open those
And
boxes.
but they can't throw them away, so they just,
Right.
anyway, so that's why that was written.
Okay, but this gets back to the
Yeah,
very
remember
issue
the
I was
water
trying to get to, is we've been sort of talking about, worried about if it's enclosed, they can put stuff in there. We don't want them doing that.
Well, we don't want them doing that for the debris factor. It has nothing to
Exactly.
do with
We
it.
gotta make sure we
It
understand why, that's why, not.
it has to
I
tie
don't
it
care
into
if
the
people store
debris
anything,
factor.
but
We could care less what it looks like.
If the debris factor is
it's
a
the
factor,
debris
then of
factor.
course you
Yeah.
can't have any deck furniture out in your backyard, because, that's it.
Kevin is waiting patiently to jump into this.
Okay.
It's been so
Just,
quiet tonight.
just a comment on the debris factor. You can't stop people from, whether they have walls or not, can't stop people from parking their cars under there, putting the boat there for the winter, and
Having
it may get, wet, but you can put the Christmas decorations under there for the year, okay? So the debris is gonna be there whether you've got a solid brick wall or not, or nothing.
It minimizes the debris.
It
A
minimizes,
lot more stuff
I'll give you
Can't see
that,
it.
I'll give you that. But the idea that this is gonna eliminate debris just isn't an issue. The problem that I'm trying to come to grips with, we have an obligation, it was like what Peter found, the FEMA stuff, and I found a couple of other things on, going on the internet. Everybody all the regulations that everybody else in the world has, it's all about the insurance. Okay, and we have a resource that we're trying to protect. And I'm just wondering, whether we allow these panels or not, is it worth prohibiting people from having it, is that definitely protecting the resource? And before you reiterate if you have like Hurricane Bob and, and God forbid, one of the number 5s that they got down in the Caribbean recently, I don't care what you got there, okay? If you had a concrete pillbox on Surf Drive, it was still going to wind up in the oyster pond, okay? So we got to. I just am a little concerned about overstepping. You may be absolutely right, but I don't know if it's worth the fight for what may or may not be potential damage based on whether it's a Category 2 storm or a Category 4 storm, and just what damage would be caused with that difference. And we're impacting someone's ability to park his car for the winter under the house. That's all.
I'm not sure that we are impacting that, but
Still park?
the way the regulations stand, they're very restrictive. I don't think we're talking about making them more restrictive than they are as written. We're talking about interpreting them and reacting to these proposals, projects that people come in that overstep what the regulations say. And they come in and make a case for it. So.
Are they overstepping, or are they trying to push the boundary?
Well, they're trying to push the boundary,
Push the
but,
boundary. The
but
regulations
I'm
say-
just saying, I don't think our conversation is about making our regulations more restrictive than they're already written.
Clarify.
To clarify.
It's to clarify them, yeah.
They're clarified. It says open
Okay.
pilings. It says.
So does our regulations, do our regulations prohibit these breakaway panels?
Yeah, he just read
Just read it.
Open pilings,
Open
no
pilings
sheer
or
walls.
columns, I think.
One of the
Do you have
things I
your
think that
regulations?
changed is the.
No, I can find it.
Then that's fine.
Well,
Okay.
If we had Attorney Wall in here arguing,
No, but.
he could probably argue that this didn't
I guess
prohibit
they
breakaway
didn't vote
walls.
on
well, you
Yeah,
know what? We
wait a
don't-
minute.
No.
Jamie's been trying to talk, and he's been sitting here
Sorry.
quietly, and everybody's
Let me
just
see your
talking
paper,
away.
Ken.
No, he's not. He's been
Calling on
fixing
Jamie.
it.
You're killing time. All I want to say is that the regulations are pretty clear. We've let it go a little bit because of like elevators and such. And that's where I'll just say engineers in general, applicants are pushing those limits.
Yeah.
So
As much,
further,
as
I would
much.
propose that maybe we consider like that we revert to the original regulations that prohibit anything except open pilings. But maybe in light of elevators and such, that we maybe have an amendment of a percentage of the first floor square footage can be either solidly enclosed, like in an elevator situation, or with breakaway panels, but limited to.
Well, it could go to the 200 square feet, because that's already in our regs.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Problem with
so-
the
saying,
all right,
that
so-
could be a-
percentage
Something on
is-
that idea, so
Yeah.
that you're not, so across the board, any applicant knows that they're not gonna get away with saying that the garage space is elevator shaft. That it would be either an X percentage, or if it's a declared 200 feet, square feet, and that's that.
Yeah,
And then-
I'd like to stay away from the percentage, just because some
The bigger
people
the
in
house,
tiny
the more
houses are gonna end
be
up with
punished.
nothing useful, and other people are gonna
Okay,
wind up
so
with
the
a football
200 square
field.
feet.
And that's already in our regs.
I mean, I have no problem enclosing an entryway, stairwell, and an elevator,
And that's about 200 square
200
feet.
square feet.
and a chase for utilities. Maybe
So when people get out,
we
they can
say,
put their groceries inside the
maybe
door.
then, rather than putting square footage or a percentage thing on, you say, you may enclose an entryway, staircase, and elevator.
Then I'm gonna make my stairway
I
go
think
all
that
the way
people
up.
are gonna push
Way you've ever
that,
seen.
Yeah.
push that.
It'll be a big entryway.
I like the
Yeah.
200 square feet, which is.
Because we already have that.
We already have that, and people actually acknowledge that and
They have.
stick to it.
Yes, because we've never deviated from that.
That's right.
No, you haven't. You've only
So
deviated,
for-
you've actually only deviated
200
it in
square
one
feet
way.
would
If
be
you
what?
actually read the reg,
Oh, God.
you
12,
actually
Eh, eh,
read the
About
regulations,
the,
if you actually
vertical?
read your 200 square foot regulation, it says you may have that 200 square feet if you are outside the resource area buffer to all other resource areas. And you have not been consistent with
No,
that
you're
one.
not.
So anyway, here's the
Well,
thing.
here's
You
the
have
thing, people want us to
presumptions,
discuss
okay, guys?
this,
So
and then we remember
let's,
the things that we weren't consistent.
we'll
That wouldn't be consistent.
bat this around for another 5-10 minutes, and I just want to read you some
6, 7
passage, what?
5 minutes.
5 minutes,
Yeah.
some passages from your
Do I have to
regulations.
say anything?
I want everybody, I'm giving everybody some homework, and I'm going to look stuff up. Write these citations down. Everybody grab a
I
pen.
am, just a minute.
Yes, boss.
FWR.
Always a catch.
I wrote them down for Kevin, so, and you, I'm just gonna, I'll give them to you. FWR, we're gonna read the presumption first. It's FWR 10.3.8,
That's right there.
3B, 1 through 5.
Yep.
It says, "The following activities proposed within a velocity zone and of land subject to coastal storm flowage shall presume to have a significant or cumulative adverse effect on the protected resource area values. Construction of new structures, including buildings, shed, garages, additions, substantial improvements to existing structures, reconstruction of any structure that has sustained substantial damage, new parallel shear walls or vertical walls for existing structures."
Right.
Okay, impermeable pavings or roads, blah, blah, blah. That always says new, new, new. So you need to grapple with raising and
Yeah.
rebuilding, is that new or not?
Development.
New development, reconstruction, okay? Then we look at 10.3.8, 4D, so that's your presumption. Then you go 10.3.8, 4D, 1 through 5, and that is the performance standard that says everything's prohibited except for open foundations and pilings. I think what this regulation is not missing, but maybe has been interpreted, is not to include raise or rebuild and just include new construction. And new construction, I can say, the staff will always argue because of, there's one thing in here and I can't put my fingers on it. is that it says that any alteration of vegetated cover in a velocity zone is prohibitive, and that is what your staff will present to you if you have an undeveloped lot in a velocity zone, somebody wants to develop, and the staff will come and say, your regulations say alterations to a vegetative cover in a velocity zone is prohibitive, and that just stops that right there. Okay, so I think I want everybody to go home. I want you to kind of read these passages, think about it, and then think about the arguments that the permitting community comes before you and says, new structure on the, or old structure on the ground, new structure up, and let's try to clarify these regulations.
And Jennifer, through the zoning board and the building department, when you tear a building down, it's no longer grandfathered. If it's non-conforming, then it has to conform. And that's why people used to leave one wall up, so that it maintained its non-conformity or its old use.
The
Once it's
absolute
gone,
way
it's brand-new construction, whether there was a
people
house there or
attempt to get
not.
around any regulation never ceases to amaze me. One wall, really?
One wall.
Oh.
We had that case.
The whole house.
Look at Steve.
Driving to Boston, right now. There's
So,
some
and
really hysterical
I
looking
think,
walls.
and guys, next time I do want to have, to add to this, I do want to have a discussion about the 25-foot offset. Jamie, I think you mentioned that last week, and I just
Yeah.
kind of lost it when I did this. I think this was
The
enough.
FWRV zone, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, our offset to the
Our
B
plus
zone. I
one.
think with the new maps and the way we've been thinking about it, it's a discussion we can have. We may,
It's a discussion we can have.
We have been
We have
interpreting
had
a
it,
certain
and-
way.
I know, so we need to clarify,
So we go-
clarify that interpretation.
V to A versus V to
Because
X.
that 25-foot offset is also within this body of regulations. So if we're going to start interpreting that differently with the new FEMA maps, then we need to modify this regulation and clarify that as
Yep.
well. Okay?
That's what we've done.
Simplify and
done.
clarify.
Right?
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
You certainly may.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks for distributing.
Thank you, guys. That
we
was
are
like an
adjourned.
hour and a half. That was good.
Wareham.
You know, like if it's a
We should
steep
have more of
slope,
these.
the zone comes to here.
And I'm here for you, Susan.
Yes, I think we need it, so we don't have only, we have a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
It's brand new.
It's got a
So,
Weeks ago.
and then you have an A zone, we include that, because it gives us a little bit of, so we work, that's how we're going to do it.
What's existing if it's all gone?
Board director.
I just remember